Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show, Ancient Secrets Revealed. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma. We're in a cloud right now up here in the mountain. So I can't see out the windows hardly. But at any rate, today's subject is a very interesting one, and it's huge. It's vast. I mean, basically, it's the foundation of the human psyche, human behavior. And it's a piece it's very interesting actually, because it's a piece that's missing from modern psychology, really. And it's called the five Tanmatras. And the idea is, as I've spoken about in previous podcasts, of course, there's what in the West is referred to as the unified field, the absolute, pure isness, pure consciousness, which is interesting because consciousness equals isness. So that's, everything is built out of consciousness. It's a self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness. And it's a mathematically precise structure. Consciousness is conscious of the only thing that there is, itself, and it becomes conscious of itself and does a double take. And that's mathematically precise. One becomes two. There's no 1.5, anything like that. It's two. Consciousness becomes aware of those two things. It's three. Consciousness becomes aware of those three things. We're into set theory now in mathematics. It's four. It cascades out to infinity. And then all that interacts. It's a self-interacting dynamic. And that's where you get, the whole number line, fractions, irrational numbers, everything. And it creates then a foundational structure. And that foundational structure is fundamental to the source of the manifestation of existence. It's all just the play of consciousness, like Swami Muktananda said, So what we have here then is that everything is built out of that fundamental quality, that fundamental nature. And different things like a rose versus a daisy, for example. What's happening there are different elements, different qualities within that structure that are more lively in the daisy than in the rose, more lively in a human being than in a pencil, and so that's the foundation of existence. But the important point is that fundamentally, in its deepest nature, its truest nature, it's coming right out of the absolute, right out of the unified field, right out of what in the Vedic language they call Chaitanya. Okay. And it has a very mathematically precise structure. And that structure within the Vedic literature is described in fantastic detail. And there are 8 swaras, they're called. Swaras are like the fundamental building blocks within that structure. And they correspond to the vowel sounds in Sanskrit. So you see, Sanskrit isn't just a made-up language. Sanskrit is actually the sounds that are fundamental to and inherent in the very nature of the structure of existence. So as it emerges out, each of those 8 swaras, those 8 vowel sounds, if you will, and the swaras actually, they're fundamental to the sounds because the swaras themselves are within the absolute. But let's not get too caught up in details there, okay? All this is very profound and very deep and very beautiful. And I've talked about a lot of it in previous podcasts. But at any rate, you have the 8 swaras and then which are fundamental. And then corresponding to those 8 swaras there's 8 prakritis, one for each swara. And these prakritis then are kind of like a more manifest version, if you will, of the swaras. And each of those prakritis have what's called the 5 tanmatras, the same 5 tanmatras. They're just They're just one correlates, the quality of one correlates with one prakriti, and the five correlates to the next, and each in their own unique way. And so you got 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 8 times. And those are called the Tanmatras. Now, the important thing about that to keep in mind is that all that is within the structure of perfection. It's within the structure of divinity. It's within the structure, the mathematically precise structure of the mechanics of existence itself. And you can see those five emerging through all levels of existence in various ways. Think about it. We have a torso and we have 5 appendages. We got 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head. The 5 senses, those correspond to the 5 Tanmatras. Now, what's really interesting, at least for our subject today, is that there are 5 fundamental structures, fundamental qualities, fundamental currents that are fundamental to the psyche, the individual psyche, human psyche. Okay? And what's also very interesting is that in the West, there's a guy, Wilhelm Reich. He was a colleague of Sigmund Freud's, friend of Sigmund Freud's, and he came up with 5 characterological types. And those 5 characterological types are, in fact, based upon the 5 Tanmatras, okay? One problem, really, with the 5 characterological types and the way it's expressed is that, at least the way it's generally stated, I'm sure there's some psychologists out there that maybe gets this or whatever, but generally speaking, those 5 types aren't really viewed as 5 divine currents so much as they're viewed as 5 different ways people are messed up. And then it can be combinations. Nobody's purely any one. We all have some degree, all 5. Just like a rose versus a daisy, different qualities emerge more fully. And so, but what we're talking about when we talk about the 5 different ways people are messed up, really what we're talking about there is just the karma swirling around, if you will, these 5 different Tanmatras, and how that karma swirls is highly complicated. But the fundamental nature of the thing and the fundamental principles of the thing emerge in a very profoundly beautiful and exquisite way. It says in the Vedic that prana, which is life breath, where does prana come from? Right out of the absolute. It's the fundamental breath that we could say compels the absolute to manifest into relative. It's the energy behind that, if you will. And they say that prana, the 5 divine currents, okay, prana plus karma equals mind. And so the whole function of the human psyche and the human behavior and everything around that is really a function of karma and prana emerging in the form of the 5 divine currents. Now let's take a look at how that manifests. You could say the soul, if you will, when it enters the body, it comes in through the top of the head, crown chakra. Comes in through the top. So we're spiritual beings and we're incarnating. We're entering into the physiology, and it comes into the physiology through the top and goes all the way through all the different, the whole vertical energy dynamic, the whole thing represented even in the symbol for the medical, with the Ida Pingala, Sushumna, like that. And it all comes down through all the different chakras and finally roots in the first chakra, the sacrum area. That's why they call it sacrum, sacred bone. Because when you're fully incarnated, that's the whole process of human evolution, to be fully incarnated, fully integrated, so that the physical surface of your life, your behavior, is completely in harmony with your divinity. You see? But by virtue of karma, there's all this karma swirling around that has these different influences upon that process uh, that create what's called the characterological types. And there are 5 of them. So the first characterological type has to do with when the child, even still in utero, and maybe during the birthing process, some karma, something. It can be that maybe the mother was really stressed, maybe really terrified, maybe really unhealthy. Uh, and so the soul of the fetus doesn't want to go there, doesn't want to enter that. It's called existential terror. Terror. To exist is to be terrified, you know? And so what happens then is that even at that early stage of the incarnation of the individual, they don't integrate even at the very beginning. So they're kind of living up there. And you've seen people like that, you know, you're just kind of like they're always airheads. Sometimes they might call them, or they're just kind of out there. They're very spiritually oriented. They tend to be, even if they don't use the word spiritual. It's, you know, they're up there, and so they're conceptual, they're intellectual. These are different ways that can emerge, and but because they haven't fully entered into the body, uh, the physicality as they develop into adults, and that as they grow up, the physicality tends to be under energized, thin, kind of emaciated, maybe oftentimes left right imbalances just because they're not in their body, really, you know. Now, one thing that says in modern psychology, and it's also consistent with Vedic, is that the main things that form our psyche are in the, you know, it's in the first 5 years of our life. And so what we've just taken a look at here is the first stage of that, which is in utero and right even during the birthing process. Okay. The next stage has to do with, okay, what's the next stage in development of a child? It's baby mother. It's when the baby is nursing and one with mother. And if there's karma there, if there's some karma interruption there, what happens is that the child doesn't develop the ability to give and receive nourishment, to receive nourishment. It doesn't really feel one with mother. Reasons for that can be, again, karma has so many different possible ramifications, but within the arena of the process, it might be, for example, that maybe even the mother's breast milk is sour or something. And so that creates an inability to receive nourishment, which in adulthood then becomes a challenge in receiving love, because really, you know, mother child love, you know. And so as adults, they have difficulty in relationship because they can't receive the love, they can't digest it, even if it's offered. It's never good enough, you know. It's not right. And they also have a difficulty giving it. Why? Because sometimes it's called orality. They're starving, really. And so they want and they pull on other people to try to get that love that they can't get even when it's offered. So that creates a dynamic. And that's the second characterological type. But you see, the important point is the foundation of the spirituality current is divine. It's our spiritual nature. It's just the karma around it that prevented it from entering into our being and living it fully. Same with love. Love is a divine current, you know, but it's just the karma around it. But the current itself is fine. Uh, uh, the next one then is sometimes we refer to as the sensitivity current, because, okay, we've entered into the body, we're living in the body, but somehow, and classically, generally speaking, it's like maybe the mother is evenly over attentive. Here, eat, and push food, and here, be clean, clean you up, fix you up, and so it all becomes invasive. And so what do? They put on padding, they get big and fat, just to kind of protect and pad themselves from all the invasion in adult life. Then what you've got is like a John Candy or somebody. They're kind of pinched here to try to block it from coming in, pinched in the rear end to try to block it from coming, and then they kind of turn into a physical sausage. So kind of like, one thing that's interesting, this is a little tangential to that, but when you work with people like that, when you let's say when you talk to somebody like that over the phone, but you've never met them, they can sometimes feel really small and really little, and you just imagine this petite little person, but then you see them and it's just this big fat person, and you're like, oh my God, I read them completely wrong, but really you didn't, because energetically they're pulled in, they're hiding, they're small, and they're trying to protect from the invasion. And the big part is just padding to protect that small little thing. That's why, and forgive me, this stuff gets kind of it can be really highly personal for people, but sometimes it's the big, heavy, fat people that have the tiny little dogs. It's like, you think they have a bulldog or some big, huge dog, but why? Because it's corresponding with their energy dynamic. They feel small, and so they can relate to this tiny little helpless little dog. Okay. But the double bind with that characterology type is really painful. All the characterology types have painful double binds. Spirituality, double bind is to exist is to die. Love current, the double bind is I want love, but I can't receive it even when it's given. With the sensitivity current, there's a double bind there that says, how do I say it? I want to love. I want to accommodate mommy. That's my mother. She's, this is a little child. So I want to make her happy. And in adult life, they want to make people happy. But the thing is, they feel invaded, but they can't show it. So it's kind of takes on this, if you can load the wagon, I can pull it. I want to please you. But now what's happened is they've compromised themselves. And what does that elicit? Rage. I'm sitting here doing all this for everybody and blah, blah, blah. And, it's not enough. And I'm carrying this load and I'm being invaded on top of it. So you got that dynamic going on. Then the next one is the commitment current. And so now we're looking, I was probably around 3 years old or something like that. The next is the commitment current. The kid gets a little older, let's say 3 or 4 at that stage. And all of a sudden they kind of see that, hey, there's some dynamic going on here within the family unit, mother and father. Something's not right. And, but now they were relying on mother and father to support and love them. But now they look and something's not right. And what does that elicit? It's a sense of betrayal. And also a sense that they have to be the adult because the parents aren't before they're ready. So they displace their energy, upward, and they try to walk around. You might see the guys walking around the beach with these big upper bodies and tiny little butts, just to try to, I'm right and you're wrong becomes their mentality. If people would just listen to me, everything would be fine, kind of a thing. And there are other ways it can manifest. Another typical example that's cited in the literature is a woman. How did she gain control of this situation that wasn't right? Well, sometimes they just come across very lovey, and they become like a little innocent child up front. Because why? Because it gives them power, it gives them attention. Or there's also it's called a seductive psychopath, men or women. They act in a way that seduces people to be impressed by them and honor them, because now why do they do that? Because now they can control people. So that's the fourth one. And another common aspect of the fourth one is like with a female, if she's there and she's kind of gaining control of the situation by being so sweet and so tender and so wonderful up here, but what's happening is she's blocking the flow of energy in her body. And so in that sort of displacement, the lower body can get big and the upper body stays kind of small, you know. And then the last one is the perfection current. You know, the kid gets a little older, maybe 5 years old, and they try to be perfect. They think they need to be perfect. They think they need to do things perfectly. When those people become adults, they're the kind of people that they look like they're wearing a suit or a formal attire, even when they're not. And you walk into their house and it feels like Nordstrom or something. Everything is perfect. Everything's got to be perfect. That's how they feel. Their life has to be okay. Now, Wilhelm Reich was a colleague of Sigmund Freud. So a lot of times if you read that literature, it's all about sex, you know. And that can be one catalyst for how it manifests. So it's in the early childhood there. But even more importantly than that, you see, those are just the story based on the first 5 years of one's life. But really the karma that creates that comes from past lives. That's why you can have a bunch of kids, all of the same family, and one of them will be commitment current, another will be spirituality current, another, you know, because it has to do with one's individual karma, you see. So it's not what the environment is so much as how they react to the environment, okay? And those are the 5 divine currents. Those are the 5 Tanmatras. So, you know, in the West, it's not uncommon to, you know, attack disease. If there's a disease, if there's an imbalance, if there's a psychological problem, oh, okay, we have to go after the problem. In the East, it's commonly more about the health. Feed the health. You can't get rid of darkness by trying to stamp out the darkness. You get rid of darkness by bringing in the light, you see? So it's a very different approach, fundamentally different approach to how to heal these karmic dynamics. Number one is meditation, because in meditation, the awareness taps into that level of divinity and wells up through the different aspects of physiology. Okay. And all of this is contained within what we've talked about this in the past. It's the chit, it's the subconscious mind. So how we function consciously and our perspective on things, and this person is good, that person is bad, this is right, that's wrong, whatever. That's actually foundationally found in the subconscious, which is called the chit. And so we think we're justifying things logically. You can justify anything with the intellect or emotionally, because it's how it feels in our conscious awareness and in our being that we can experience. But really, it's rooted in the chit, which is the karma we're talking about. You could say that that's where the seat of the karma is in that sense. Okay, and that's a lot, and it's so if you're not familiar with 5 divine currents or anything, you might want to listen to this more than once. And if people are interested, I mean, we can go into great detail with all of this. But you know, it's ironic that there's a principle. Where did I hear this? That, you know, the English went to India and they took a lot of the knowledge, not to mention gemstones and beautiful Mortise statues, and put them in their museums in England. To this day, they're still there. So they took all of that, and then sometime later they went back to India and they introduced it to India as Western knowledge, you know, which is really interesting. how did that even happen? And tangentially, but still related to that, when it comes to language, it's commonly believed that it was Indo-European, right? And then it came over, and that's where Sanskrit came from. And it's all upside down. But in a purer sense, in a more absolute sense, in a more expanded sense, language comes from deep within. It comes from within the absolute. And then it blossoms in different parts of the world to varying degrees of clarity based on the refinement of the culture, really, in different ways. That's why Ra is the sun, and Ram is the sun, and like that. Or Ma, all that. Those things are universal. And they're the fundamental building blocks that come right out of the physiology from a deep level within a person's being. So where things come from, try to give the West credit or try to give the East credit or whatever, in a most fundamental sense, it's in the absolute, which is the foundation for all points in creation. Okay. Anything else, Scotty?
Maybe you could talk more about people work with these different currents to, kind of free themselves up, or to kind of get a better relationship with those things. Or, I know you said meditate. Is there any other thing?
Yeah, we can. And I mean, we could. I give classes on this that last for years. They're long weekend classes 4 times a year with homework in between, and but a couple of principles that just come to mind. Exploration tills the soil that facilitates the self-correcting mechanism, as opposed to you're behaving this way, stop behaving that way, and start behaving this way, behavioral modification. And the problem with that is all it's doing, I call that Band-Aid therapy. You're just putting a Band-Aid on top of the problem and thinking it's healed now because you can't see the wound anymore because there's a Band-Aid on top. And that just creates another layer of denial, really. And so it's an interesting approach, because there's the whole thing about catharsis. Somebody has a perspective based on their karma around their divine currents and their perspective on life or people or whatever, and they claim it as their truth, and they're even encouraged to stand up and claim it as their truth, and this is my truth. Well, that's not their truth. It's their stuff, it's their issues. And so, and you might see it as a cathartic release. Yeah, it feels really great. I got up and I yelled and screamed, and I feel so much better. But it's not really healing, because you're not getting to the root of it, and all you're doing is reinforcing, justifying a perspective that's not based on a person's divinity. It's based upon their issues, So all these are deep concepts, and please reflect on them if you're because it's a delicate process, and it's a subtle process, and even my words here, if they're not really understood, and I'm sure they aren't, you can't express this stuff perfectly, they can even seem like you can shoot them full of holes, find flaws with it. But the fundamental principles that we're conveying here is just the nature of existence. It's the nature of truth, it's the nature of life. It's what it means to be human, All right, I think that's it, Scotty. That's a lot. We went through all 5 of them. That's a lot. And I think people do well to just reflect on it again. If you want, listen to this podcast more than once. And based on response and that, we might go into them more deeply in the future.
Yeah, everybody to comment and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, feel free to comment, ask questions. If we get a lot of questions, and if it makes sense, we'll do we'll do more with this. All right. Thanks for listening.